A grand English estate, a thrilling murder game, and then a real body is found. A grand estate bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun, a game designed for entertainment, a detective who suspects it might turn deadly, a whisper of dread. It arrives on a quiet morning, an envelope of thick, expensive parchment, its edges crisp, its wax seal unbroken. Hercule Poirot studies it as he sips his perfectly brewed tisane, his sharp eyes narrowing. The handwriting is flourished yet deliberate, the sort of penmanship that suggests wealth, sophistication, and perhaps the weight of hidden motives. He slides a silver letter opener beneath the seal, carefully unfolding the contents. My dear Poirot, you are cordially invited to Nass House for a weekend of intrigue and amusement. A game of murder hunt has been arranged. Your presence would be most delightful. The signature is undeniably familiar. Ariadne Oliver, the celebrated crime novelist, a woman of boundless imagination and a habit of suspecting trouble where none should exist. Yet Poirot knows one thing to be true. When Ariadne Oliver has a bad feeling, it is seldom misplaced. He reads the invitation again. A murder hunt, a fabricated mystery, an elaborate performance staged for the amusement of England's high society. Guests will play their roles, searching for clues, piecing together a fictional crime. It is all meant to be fun, harmless. And yet, Poirot sets the letter down, frowning. There is something in its tone, something unsaid, something lurking beneath the formal pleasantries. His fingers drum against the polished wood of his desk. He has attended such diversions before, seen how the elite find pleasure in death without consequence. But this time, a whisper of unease coils in his chest. What if, this time, the game is not a game at all? The arrival at Nass House. Poirot steps from the car, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel driveway. Before him, Nass House rises like a thing from another era, a grand, sprawling estate with ivy creeping up its stone walls, its windows glinting in the last embers of daylight. The air carries the scent of freshly cut grass and something more delicate, a lingering trace of roses, wilting in the summer heat. Laughter and the clinking of glasses drift from the terrace, where guests dressed in their finest evening wear sip champagne, exchanging pleasantries with effortless charm. To any outsider, it is a scene of unspoiled luxury, a portrait of wealth and leisure. But Poirot is no outsider. He observes the way the servants move a little too quickly, a little too nervously. He notes the flicker of tension in some of the guests, the forced laughter, the stolen glances. He listens not just to what is said, but to what is carefully left unspoken. A woman pushes through the crowd with purpose, her presence unmistakable. Ariadne Oliver, dressed in a flowing gown of deep blue, her unruly curls half-pinned, half-tumbling over her shoulders. She reaches Poirot in a hurry, grasping his arm with fingers that are cold despite the warm evening air. "Poirot," she breathes, her voice unsteady. "Thank God you came." He studies her carefully. Ariadne Oliver is not a woman easily unsettled. Her imagination may be vivid, but her instincts have never led her astray. Tonight, there is no humor in her voice, no exaggeration in her manner. Tonight, she is truly afraid. "You are troubled, madame," he says gently. "Tell me, what is it that weighs so heavily upon your mind?" She glances over her shoulder, lowering her voice. "I don't know exactly," she admits, "but something about this night, it feels wrong." Poirot waits, patient as ever. He has learned that the truth, no matter how well concealed, always finds a way to reveal itself. "This game, it was meant to be innocent, Poirot," she continues, her fingers tightening around his sleeve. "Just a bit of fun. But someone is using it for something else, something real." A chill curls down Poirot's spine. "And I think," she hesitates, her voice barely a whisper now, "I think someone is going to die." Poirot does not blink, does not move. He simply exhales softly. "Then, madame," he murmurs, "I fear the game has already begun." The laughter fades, and a chilling scream shatters the peace of the grand estate. The game turns deadly. The evening progresses with the light-hearted laughter of the guests, their voices mixing with the clink of champagne glasses and the occasional burst of dramatic flair from those playing the murder hunt. The estate's great hall is alive with excitement, the perfect backdrop for an evening that promises nothing but harmless fun. Poirot watches from the sidelines, keeping a careful eye on the proceedings. It is all so ordinarily perfect until the laughter is interrupted by a blood-curdling scream. It comes from the direction of the boathouse. The sound is sharp, unnervingly real, the kind of scream that does not belong to a game. For a moment, there is utter silence and no one dares move, as if the air itself has frozen in shock. Then, like a wave, the shock hits the guests, and everyone surges toward the sound, the laughter now replaced by frantic murmurs and scrambling footsteps. Poirot doesn't move immediately. He stands still, as if waiting for the full weight of the moment to catch up. This was not part of the game. His eyes narrow as he turns toward the boathouse. The pieces of the puzzle, scattered, are beginning to form an uneasy picture. The discovery of Marlene Tucker's body. As Poirot reaches the boathouse, the scene that greets him is one that could have been ripped from the pages of a novel, but it's not fiction anymore. A young woman's body lies crumpled near the water's edge. Her name is Marlene Tucker, a guest at the estate, her porcelain skin now marred by the violent red of death. She has been strangled, her delicate neck showing the clear marks of the attack. A tight grip, unmistakable in its cruelty. But as Poirot kneels beside the body, his sharp eyes notice something that doesn't belong. Marlene's clenched fist, still holding on to something that doesn't belong in a murder scene. With a careful motion, Poirot gently pries open her fingers. There, tucked in the palm, is a scrap of paper torn, stained with blood, its edges frayed. Poirot doesn't speak. His lips tighten, his gaze sharpens as he unfolds the paper with the precision of a man who understands the weight of such small details. The word written on the scrap is incomplete. A single letter, a jagged H, marks the paper. The imminent sense of danger. Poirot's mind begins to race. The paper is not simply a piece of evidence, it is a message, a final, desperate clue left by Marlene in her last moments. The letter, incomplete, and yet full of significance, brings a flood of possibilities. Horror. What could it be? Was she trying to name someone, to identify her killer? Or was it a part of a larger, darker game that none of them had signed up for? Poirot's thoughts whirl as he lifts his eyes to scan the surrounding area. The other guests are gathering around, their faces masks of shock and horror, unsure whether this is part of the game or an actual tragedy. But Poirot already knows this is no game. And somewhere, amidst the confusion, the killer is still among them. Cliffhanger. As Poirot rises slowly, his gaze flickers to the shadowy edge of the boathouse, where a figure moves quickly, disappearing just out of sight. Poirot's heart quickens. Is it the killer, slipping into the night, or someone else trying to hide from what they know? The game has changed, madame. Poirot murmurs to Ariadne. His voice is cold as the waters that lap against the boathouse. And I fear it is far more dangerous than you could have ever imagined. Secrets beneath the surface. Nassau was no longer a haven of grandeur. The air was thick with tension, and every passing moment felt heavier than the last. Poirot's silent watch. The estate was silent now, but Poirot could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The grand, sprawling halls of Nassau, once filled with laughter and light, now seemed like the very walls had closed in on everyone. The guests, though still milling around, were no longer carefree. Their laughter, if it came at all, was forced. The once celebrated murder hunt had morphed into something far more deadly, and Poirot felt the change in the atmosphere before the others even knew it. As he moved through the house, each room, each corridor seemed to whisper secrets. The shadows grew long, and the ticking of the grand clock seemed to echo in his mind. Every footstep that sounded in the distance made him pause, his eyes searching the faces of those around him. Poirot had already begun his quiet investigation. With every conversation, every moment he spent with the guests, he could feel that the web of deception was more tangled than he initially imagined. He knew now there was something far more sinister going on behind the elegant facades of these people, something darker than just a playful game. But he remained calm, his expression unreadable. He had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, they were screaming at him. The game, once so meticulously planned, was now a mask for something far more dangerous. The disappearance of Sir George and Hattie Stubbs. Poirot's mind returned to the central mystery. Sir George Stubbs had vanished. One moment he was present, offering a friendly smile, mingling with guests. The next, he was nowhere to be found. His disappearance seemed too convenient. The guests seemed to have forgotten the absence, distracted by their own fear and the unexpected murder. But Poirot's attention to detail was far sharper. Sir George wasn't the type to leave without a word, especially not when something as grave as a murder had just occurred. His absence wasn't a mere coincidence, it was a deliberate move. Poirot's suspicions only grew stronger as he found out that Hattie Stubbs, Sir George's wife, was also missing. It wasn't just a fleeting absence. She hadn't been seen since the moment of Marlene Tucker's murder. "Where is Mrs. Stubbs?" Poirot asked, his voice calm but direct as he addressed one of the staff. The staff member shifted uncomfortably, his hands fidgeting. "I don't know, Monsieur Poirot. Last I saw her, she was upstairs, but since then, she's vanished. It's almost as if she just disappeared." Poirot's lips tightened. He had seen enough to know that these were not mere disappearances, they were linked. There was a pattern to all of this. Sir George's disappearance, Hattie's sudden absence, and the brutal murder of Marlene Tucker. The guests' false identities and hidden secrets. As Poirot delved deeper into the mystery, he began to notice something unsettling about the other guests. The way they interacted with each other was not natural. There were moments when their eyes flickered nervously, their conversations abruptly cutting off when Poirot approached. Small gestures that betrayed their discomfort, the way they kept shifting in their seats, the strained smiles on their faces. At first, Poirot thought it was merely the shock of the murder causing the odd behavior. But the longer he observed, the more he realized that there was something off. The guests were hiding more than just fear. There was a shared secret, one that none of them wanted to confront. Poirot had heard rumors, whispers about the true identities of a few of the guests. Some had come to Nass House under false pretenses, using names that weren't their own. There were guests with no clear past, whose stories didn't quite add up when cross-examined. His suspicion grew with every conversation he had. Someone here was hiding something. One woman, a strikingly elegant guest who had introduced herself as Lady Beatrice, seemed to avoid his gaze whenever they spoke. Poirot noticed that she would tuck her hands under the table whenever they sat for meals, as if shielding something. Poirot's instincts told him there was more to Lady Beatrice than she was letting on. But what? A woman like her didn't just arrive at an estate like Nass House without some sort of agenda. A mysterious inheritance. And then came the discovery that made Poirot's heart race with anticipation: the inheritance. Through his quiet conversation with Sir George's solicitor, Poirot learned that Sir George had been the sole heir to a significant family fortune. A fortune that, it seemed, was not as secure as it appeared. The inheritance had recently been the subject of a legal dispute, with several distant relatives attempting to claim their share. But Sir George, according to the solicitor, had been determined to hold on to the entire estate. This inheritance wasn't just about money, it was about power. The land, the wealth, the influence tied to Nass House, it all held a dark allure, one that could drive someone to desperate measures. Poirot now understood that the murder was likely not just a random act of violence. Marlene Tucker had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, but her murder was a mere distraction from the real motives at play. The game was no longer just about who could commit the perfect murder for fun number. It was about who would inherit Nass House, who would hold the legacy that came with it. The more Poirot uncovered, the more pieces of the puzzle began to slide into place. Sir George's disappearance, Hattie's absence, the guests' unspoken fears, all of it pointed to a single undeniable truth: the inheritance was the key to this murder. The growing danger. As Poirot pieced together the fragments of the story, he realized that danger was not just lurking outside the walls of Nass House. No, It was inside, nestled among the guests, hidden beneath their smiles. The murderer was still here, and they were more dangerous than Poirot had initially imagined. The stakes were growing higher with every passing moment. The inheritance wasn't just a family treasure, it was the battleground for something far more sinister. The real question now wasn't about who had killed Marlene Tucker, it was about who was willing to kill next. Poirot had to act quickly. The walls were closing in. The more he uncovered, the less he trusted anyone around him. Someone in that house had murdered for greed, and they would kill again if necessary. The boathouse where Marlene Tucker had been found was an eerie, isolated structure, hidden from the rest of the estate by thick trees and underbrush. It had always been a place of intrigue, a forgotten corner of Nass House that guests rarely ventured into. But now, as Poirot stood at its threshold, he could feel an unsettling weight in the air, like a long-forgotten secret pressing against the walls. The wreckage of the murder had been examined, but something remained, something left untouched by the chaos of Marlene's tragic end. Poirot moved cautiously through the boathouse, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. There was an old, rusted trunk tucked away in the far corner, hidden beneath layers of dust and spider webs. It wasn't just the trunk that caught his attention, it was the feeling that surrounded it, a sense of dread that seemed to pulse from it. The air grew heavier, and Poirot's fingers tightened around the brass handle. The trunk was locked, but Poirot wasn't a man to be thwarted by such trivialities. A simple twist of his wrist, and the lock fell away. The lid creaked as it opened, the sound echoing in the silence like the opening of a tomb. Inside, nestled within layers of old clothes and forgotten memorabilia, was something that made Poirot's blood run cold. A blood-stained dress. The fabric was dark, crimson stains marring its elegant structure. The dress was delicate, perhaps once belonging to a woman of refinement, someone who understood the subtlety of fashion. But now it was marred, ruined by the unmistakable evidence of violence. Poirot's mind raced. Whose dress was this? It was clear that it had been hidden away with intent, as if the killer knew this would be the key to unraveling the truth. Could it belong to Hattie Stubbs? The question struck him like a blow. Hattie's disappearance had already raised suspicion, but to find a blood-stained dress in the boathouse, hidden away as though someone was trying to cover up a crime, it added a new layer of terror to the mystery. If this dress truly belonged to Hattie, then the stakes had just escalated. Where was her body? Was she the second victim, or was something more insidious at play? Had Hattie faked her death? Or worse, was she still alive, hiding somewhere within Nass House, watching Poirot's every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Poirot took a step back, his mind whirring with possibilities, but as he did, he heard something. A rustling noise, a faint movement from the far end of the boathouse. He froze, every sense alert. The air seemed to shift, the silence of the boathouse now broken by the subtle sound of something or someone moving in the shadows. Cliffhanger. The rustling grew louder, and Poirot's heart quickened. Was someone here? And if so, had they been watching him all along? The dead man's truth. Nass House had once been a symbol of beauty, opulence, and aristocratic charm, standing tall on its sprawling grounds. Now it was an edifice shrouded in a fog of death. The grand halls that had hosted luxurious dinners and lively celebrations had become a prison of silence, broken only by the creak of wooden floors and the occasional rustle of the trees outside. There was a palpable sense of something watching, something lurking just beyond the edges of the light. The guests, now more prisoners than visitors, walked the corridors with a sense of unease, constantly glancing over their shoulders, haunted by the fear that they were not alone. Poirot stood alone in one of the grand rooms, his sharp eyes scanning the walls, the furniture, the details that others might miss. He had always believed that the smallest of details held the truth, and now, more than ever, he was convinced that Nass House was speaking to him in whispers. The old portraits on the walls, those of the estate's long-dead ancestors, seemed to follow him with their painted eyes, judging him. Yet it wasn't the paintings or the thick oak doors that caught his attention. No, it was the house itself, almost like a living entity, breathing with the same tension and fear that gripped its inhabitants. The walls, decorated with ivy patterns and golden trims, seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. He had been here for days, but every time he walked through these halls, he felt like something was changing, shifting, like a storm building on the horizon, waiting for the right moment to break. The truth, Poirot knew, was close, so close, in fact, that he could feel it pressing against him. He was piecing the puzzle together, slowly but surely. The estate's history, its secrets, the people who now occupied it, all of it was interconnected in ways that seemed almost too intricate to be accidental. There was an old crime, a forgotten tale buried beneath layers of time, one that had been erased from the records, deliberately hidden and carefully forgotten by all but a few. As Poirot continued his investigation, he learned of a long-buried scandalone that had involved the early family members of Nass House. A scandal so dark that the original owners had gone to extreme lengths to cover it up. But this crime wasn't just another one of the estate's tragic stories. No, this crime was a cornerstone, a pivotal moment in the history of Nass House. It had shaped the course of everything that followed, including the current murders. Someone in this house had been desperately trying to keep this secret from surfacing, and now, as Poirot came closer to uncovering the truth, the lengths they would go to keep it buried had become much clearer. Every moment spent in Nass House was beginning to feel like a slow descent into madness. Poirot's mind buzzed with questions, with theories, each more disturbing than the last. As the mystery unraveled, it was clear that the game of murder was only a distraction, a carefully crafted facade, meant to veil the true motives behind the violence that had gripped the estate. But the closer Poirot got to the truth, the more dangerous the game became. The killer, hidden in plain sight, was watching him, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. The facade of hospitality and civility was a thin veil, barely concealing the darkness beneath. Poirot felt a chill wash over him as the pieces began to fall into place. The past, though buried for so long, was coming back to life with a vengeance. And those who were involved in the original crime, ones who had been silent witnesses, were now the most dangerous of all. Poirot had gathered bits of testimonies from the guests, each piece of information adding to the growing web of intrigue. Yet there was still a central mystery that had eluded him, the mysterious disappearance of Sir George Stubbs. The man had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions. Where had he gone? Was he alive or dead? What connection did his disappearance have to the current killings? Every theory seemed to lead nowhere, each path branching off into confusion and uncertainty. But then came the revelation that changed everything. Poirot had learned from the estate's solicitor that Sir George had been involved in a legal battle over the inheritance of Nass House. The battle wasn't just about wealth, it was about power, control, and legacy. Sir George's position was precarious, had been fighting against distant relatives, some of whom had questionable motives. The inheritance wasn't just a matter of financial stability, it was a symbol of dominion over Nass House itself. The more Poirot pieced together, the more he realized that the murders were not random. They were linked directly to this battle for the estate. The killer, whoever they were, had been willing to kill to preserve the secreto, protect their claim to the inheritance, no matter the cost. Sir George had been too close to the truth, and now Marlene Tucker's murder, Hattie Stubbs' disappearance, and the recent deaths were all the consequences of a plan put into motion years ago. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, violent shock to the air. Another murder, a brutal and shocking one. The estate was rocked by news that one of Poirot's key informants, someone who had been helping him uncover the estate's history, had been found dead. The body had been found in the ancient tower, hanging by a noose, their final breath snatched away by the hands of someone who wanted to silence them forever. The discovery sent a ripple of fear throughout the house. The death was no longer just another murder, it was a warning. The words spoken by the dying victim, mere moments before they passed, were enough to send shivers down Poirot's spine. It's not a folly, it's a warning. The message was clear. Someone was afraid, someone was desperate to stop Poirot from finding out the truth. The game was no longer a playful pursuit. It was a deadly game of life and death. And the person pulling the strings would stop at nothing to ensure that the truth remained hidden forever. Poirot's mind raced as he examined the scene of the death. The victim had been a key figure in his investigation, someone who had known more than they had let on. They had been providing him with crucial details, pieces of the puzzle that had been essential in his progress. The victim's dying words were a chilling confirmation of something Poirot had suspected for a long time. This was no ordinary case. This was something much bigger, something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. The game, the murders, they were just the surface of a much deeper, darker truth, one that someone was willing to kill for. And now, Poirot was the only one left who could uncover it. But with each step he took closer to the truth, the more the walls seemed to close in around him. The killer was still out there, watching his every move. And Poirot couldn't shake the feeling that he had become the next target. The mystery was far from over, and as Poirot stood amidst the chaos of Nassau's, he couldn't help but wonder how much longer he would be able to survive this twisted game of death and deception. The killer was still watching, waiting for their moment to strike. And Poirot, despite all his brilliant deductions and sharp instincts, had no idea who would die next. Poirot stood in the center of the drawing room, his every move measured, his mind razor-sharp as he prepared to reveal the truth that had eluded everyone for so long. The guests sat around him, their faces tense, eyes shifting nervously, unsure of what the little detective would uncover next. The air was thick with anticipation. Each individual lost in their own thoughts could the secrets they'd buried so deep finally be exposed. Poirot adjusted his bow tie, his voice cool and calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his French accent slicing through the charged atmosphere. "The moment has come to unmask the one who has brought death to Nassau, the one whose lies and deceptions have turned this peaceful gathering into a nightmare." His gaze swept over the group, lingering on each suspect. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. No one dared to breathe. But just as Poirot was about to name the murderer, something happened. A sudden deafening gunshot ripped through the air, the sound so sharp and jarring that it seemed to tear through the very fabric of reality. Time seemed to slow for a split-second, an eternity of shock and disbelief. The walls of the grand drawing room shook, and the guests leaped to their feet, panic spreading like wildfire. Some screamed, others froze in place, eyes wide with terror. Before anyone could react, the room was plunged into darkness. The chandeliers flickered out, and the soft glow from the fireplace vanished in an instant, leaving them all in total, suffocating blackness. The only sound was the frantic breathing of those around them, and the deafening silence that followed the shot. Then, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, a scream of pure terror, the kind that sent chills down the spine and made the hairs on the back of one's neck stand up. It was followed by a sickening thud, as though someone had collapsed to the floor, their body crumpling with a finality that sent a wave of dread over the room. Poirot's mind immediately began to process the chaos, his senses still sharp despite the overwhelming confusion. His feet moved before he could fully think, stepping cautiously but deliberately through the darkness, trusting his instincts. The others in the room were frantic, yelling for help, but Poirot's attention was fixed. He could feel the weight of the moment, the danger thickening in the air. Someone had fallen, someone was hurt, and this time it wasn't part of the game. This was real. As the lights flickered back on, the room was revealed in stark clarity. The once elegant drawing room, full of warmth and rich colors, now felt cold and oppressive. And in the middle of it all, there was a body. One of the guests lay crumpled on the floor, their face twisted in an expression of shock, their body limp and still. A pool of blood began to spread around them, slowly soaking into the plush carpet. A fresh murder. The guests stood frozen, their eyes wide, mouths agape, unsure of what to do next. Poirot's heart raced, but his face remained impassive, a master of calm amidst the storm. He didn't rush to the body. Instead, he took in the scene around him, noting the others' reactions, the way they backed away from the corpse, the way their hands trembled at their sides. Poirot knew this was no accident. This was an assassination, a well-planned, ruthless killing. And the fact that it had occurred just as he was about to unmask the murderer meant one thing. The killer wanted to silence him, to stop him from revealing the truth. His mind whirled, but Poirot never lost control. He approached the body slowly, deliberately, even as the room buzzed with nervous energy. His eyes scanned the floor for any clues: the victim's position, their body language, any trace of struggle. Who was the victim? What had they known? What had they seen? Before he could lean in to inspect the body, a voice, cold and filled with malevolent intent, cut through the stunned silence like a blade. "You've made a mistake, Poirot," the voice said, echoing through the room, sending an icy chill down Poirot's spine. "The truth is still far from reach." The words hung in the air like a shadow, each syllable heavier than the last. Poirot's pulse quickened. The voice belonged to someone in the room, but which one? Who had spoken? Had the killer been here all along, hidden among them? Poirot's eyes narrowed as he scanned the faces in the room, each one a mixture of fear, confusion, and guilt. The silence stretched on, thick with the weight of uncertainty. One of them was playing a dangerous game, but who? And as Poirot's mind raced to identify the threat, a deeper question began to form. Who would be next? Cliffhanger. Before Poirot could speak, the lights flickered again, casting the room in a momentary flash of shadow and light. There was a shifting sound behind him, a footstep, quick and silent. The gunshot had not been the last of it. The final gambit. The tension in the room had never been thicker, the silence louder than any sound could be. Poirot stood at the center of the now emptying room, his sharp eyes scanning each of the suspects gathered before him. His investigation had finally reached its peak, and the web of deception he had been unraveling for days was about to reveal its final, deadly secret. He knew the killer now knew them, as surely as he knew the ticking of a clock. Every piece of the puzzle had fallen into place with chilling precision. But just as Poirot stepped forward, his voice ready to expose the truth and bring justice to the victims of Nass House, something unexpected happened, something that twisted the whole room into an even darker, more terrifying direction. The doors slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. The echo was sharp, deafening, a sound that reverberated through the very bones of the house. Poirot froze, his instincts flaring. Something had changed. A new danger was afoot. Before anyone could react, the voice of the killer, low and dripping with malice, echoed from the shadows. The room, once again cloaked in uncertainty, now seemed to pulse with danger. "You're too late, Poirot," the voice hissed, every word carrying with it a sinister weight. "The real game is just beginning." Poirot's heart skipped a beat. The voice was unmistakable. The killer had been here all along, hidden within the very walls they had thought were their safe haven. The truth had always been closer than they realized, and yet it had remained just beyond their reach. The door had closed, and with it, a new chapter of this twisted game began. A cold chill ran down Poirot's spine as he slowly turned, his mind racing. The walls of Nass House, once filled with the echoes of laughter, now seemed to close in around him, turning the air dense with dread. Every face before him had shifted, now twisted with suspicion, but none of them spoke. The tension was palpable, suffocating. Who had spoken? Who had issued this chilling threat? Poirot's eyes darted around, trying to decipher the threat behind the voice. But there was no movement, no signs to indicate where the killer might be. The air was thick with anticipation, and every second stretched out endlessly into the abyss of uncertainty. "You see," the voice continued, now even more menacing, "the game you thought you were playing was only a prelude, Poirot. You've uncovered the truth, but that truth is only the beginning of a far darker tale." The room seemed to grow colder with each word. "Now that you know the killer, do you believe that justice will come so easily? That you can stop me now? Think again." Poirot's sharp eyes narrowed as the enormity of the situation settled into him. The game had always been more complex than he had thought. The deaths, the lies, the twisted truths, they were all part of a much larger design, a design that he was only beginning to understand. The killer had played him from the very start, leading him in circles, pulling him into traps with each step he took. For the first time, Poirot felt the weight of doubt. Was it too late? Had he walked straight into a trap from which there was no escape? Had the killer anticipated every move, every question, and every step of Poirot's investigation? The room, once full of people, now felt empty, like a vast, silent tomb. Poirot's pulse quickened, but he didn't let fear overtake him. He couldn't afford to. This was the moment he had been preparing for. The moment that would reveal whether or not he was truly in control of the game. The voice in the darkness laughed, its coldness chilling to the bone. "You think you can expose me, Poirot? You think you can bring me to justice?" The laughter echoed, bouncing off the walls of the drawing room, growing louder, taunting. "You are but a pawn, a small part of this grand scheme. Now I hold all the pieces." Poirot's gaze sharpened. He knew the stakes, he knew what was at play. And he also knew that the final gambit had just begun. Cliffhanger. The clock's final stroke echoes through the hall, reverberating off the stone walls. And then, silence. But as the last reverberations fade, something shifts. A sudden, unexplained movement in the shadows. A figure steps forward, familiar yet unrecognizable, their features masked in darkness. The room gasps. The clock has struck midnight. But what does that mean for them all? What happens when the clock strikes midnight?